Hey guys, this is Pat with MACkiteboarding.com. We're with Sam Medysky today, that's kind of catching up and going to get a little bit background info on him.
How's it going, guys?
All right, Sam. So you grew up on Lake Huron, right? How was that growing up? I know you kind of influenced a lot by your dad being a windsurfer back in the day, and you grew up kind of with kind of wind sports, kind of second nature to you.
Yeah, I grew up. My parents had a summer, like a cottage on Lake Huron in Sauble Beach. So I'd spend my summers there. We had a bunch of dinghy sailboats, a sunfish, a laser. So I kind of sailed that with my dad growing up. And then in 1998, my dad came home with a windsurfing magazine, and it had an article in it that said the sister sport to windsurfing, kiteboarding, the latest and greatest thing. And there were some photos of like Robbie Nash and Lou Wainman and kind of the early Maui kite crew. And for whatever reason, my dad was really interested in it, and he ended up ordering a kite from, I think it came from Hawaii. It was a Whippica Classic 8.5 meter 2-line kite. It came with the lines, but it didn't come with a bar. It had instructions on how to make a windsurfing boom into a bar. So he had a Hawaiian Pro Line windsurf boom. He cut it down to, their suggested size, which was like a yard, basically. It was just massive. And then I think we put some like small like cabinet doorknobs on the ends to wrap the lines around. And
Yeah.
he figured it out somehow. And I mean, we got thrashed a lot in the early days. And but we did that with the Whippica Classic, the inflatable kite, and then quite a bit with foil kites. So my first time actually on a board in the water riding, I had it was a 6'7" directional board and a foil kite, a 3.6 Concept Air Traction X on handles. And between the handles, it had a rope, and I had an old Dakine speed seat. And I was 8 years old at the time, and that was my first ride kiteboarding. And then, fast tracked it a day, and I'm like, oh my God, what were we thinking? But
Yeah, could you imagine hooking up an 8-year-old to one of those today?
sometimes I question some of the decisions my dad had. We used to do when we were young, like this is a little later on, but when we were like 12 or 13, there was kind of a group of like young kids kiting on the Great Lakes, and all in Sauble Beach and Oliphant area. And one of our friends who had a cottage nearby, they had this little electric golf cart, and we'd drive around the beach. We used to do toe-ups on the beach with these old, I remember a lot of us had Gastra kites back then, so we had the Gastra, the GXR, and we were doing toe-ups with 2 ski rope lines, so like 60 feet or something over the beach. And my dad's like, yeah, good work, boys. Now I'm like, Jesus, what was he thinking? We could have died.
That's so awesome. That's incredible.
Yeah. I think it wasn't until, accidents obviously started to occur around the world with kiteboarding, and then safety became more of a concern, and obviously everything came in with quick releases and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it was kind of the Wild West back then.
Yeah, things you'd never be able to get away with today. It's just hilarious, like the crazy stories that people have from learning back then.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, but it makes me appreciate kind of where the sport is today. And it's been cool to be a part of kiteboarding for that long. Sometimes people ask like, oh, are you jaded by it? And it's, there's days where I feel like maybe I am a little jaded, but then I've also just had a constant progression through the sport, whether it be a career in it or kind of seeing the gear progress, but then also being a part of all these kind of different milestones within kiteboarding, whether it be the different disciplines or now like looking at wing foiling, this new sport. I'm like, geez, it's like, it's kiteboarding all over again. It's a whole new sport, but kind of, again, using the wind and the basics of sailing.
Yeah, no, it's kind of crazy. You are kind of one of those people in the industry who's literally been here since the beginning as a kid and then growing up in it, and you've pretty much done just about, any discipline you can think of at this point, you've been a part of, and then even winging, all that stuff that's kind of all, I'd say you're probably one of the more all-around riders that has done literally everything at this point.
I've tried to always stay as open-minded and as involved in all disciplines of the sport as possible, because I think, especially in a smaller sport like kiteboarding, as an athlete, you have to be well-rounded. You can't pigeon yourself into a corner. But also for me, it's always been fun to be able to do all these different disciplines. And I kind of rolled with the trends a little bit. I mean, in the early days, it was all about big air, and then, freestyle, all the unhooked stuff, and then getting into park, and then, it kind of comes full circle, and we're back to big air now, which is awesome to see. But it's progressed a lot. And I mean, I remember coming down to Michigan my first time, actually, 2005, for the King of the Great Lakes, the original event. Alex Fox was there, Damian Leroy was there. It's pretty funny now, looking back at that. And I mean, we all work in the industry now, which is funny. But
yeah, it wasn't on my radar, man. That's the funny part. Like 2005, I was 11 years old, 10 years old. I was probably not even thinking about it. Probably saw it a few times. I grew up right on the beach where that event was actually held. But I was like, never even realized what was going on until I was probably like 13.
Yeah, no, and it's cool. I mean, I think that's one thing growing up on the Great Lakes, like. And with you guys being on the Lake Michigan, it's something special. Like, the communities really come together there a lot, I find, and because it's not like Hood River, Hatteras, where it's just constantly windy and whatnot. Like, the conditions change so much, and they're so variable, and that's why I love coming to the MAC event in the fall, because I'm like, it really brings me back to my roots. Like, you're standing out there sometimes and it's a beautiful sunny day and 30 degrees Celsius, and then sometimes you're out there and it's pissing down rain and it's blowing 30 out of the north and you're shivering, but the same number of people are out there because they're chasing that wind. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. No, it is funny seeing you on the beach compared to, we get Neil on the beach, then Neil's you get Neil in the classic puppy no matter what the temperature is, and it's always cold.
Yeah, no, I know, it's so true. You can definitely tell who's like grown up on the Great Lakes, and then the Florida boys who are coming up.
Yeah, it is funny seeing that little bit of difference between the reps. You get some reps, the northern reps and the southern reps are always it's always distinctive who's dressed for what. And
oh yeah,
I think the best is always, the water was 70 degrees the week before the event, and all of a sudden the week of it's 40 degrees.
Yeah, no, and that's kind of a nice thing. Like, where I live now in Squamish, we have one kite spot basically, and the conditions they're phenomenal, but it's the same every day. They're great. It's really consistently windy during our main season, kind of May through till September. We kite almost every day, which is, we're very fortunate, but it's always the same conditions where I kind of miss the variety of growing up on the Great Lakes, and conditions are always changing. Wind directions are different. You're going to different locations for different wind directions, and that adds a lot of variety to your riding, and always keeps it interesting, I think.
Yeah, it does for sure. Yeah, I mean, I'd definitely say consistency would be nice, but definitely having the mixed bag of things keeps things fresh and interesting. There's always, pretty much every session, you're doing something different, it seems like.
Yeah, and I think that adds to, I mean, growing up there, and you're constantly, you're so motivated to ride and get out, and you kind of go wherever and ride in whatever conditions. It makes you a stronger and a better rider. I mean, there's something to say about consistency on the water is obviously really important, but I mean, you look at some of the top guys on the world tour, and I mean, they train in all sorts of different conditions around the world. But usually it's the guys who can, do their tricks in the really challenging conditions, whether it be gustier wind, cold water, choppy water, that usually tend to succeed overall. Because, training in Kawaipi Lagoon or Taiba Lagoon all the time, it's great, but it's almost like fake kiting sometimes, because you learn the trick there, but then you got to train it in real life conditions somewhere else where it's more challenging.
Yeah, so I guess kind of going back to your pro riding days, how did that all start? I know you did a bunch of trips to Hatteras with your dad back in the day, that kind of stuff. So, like, how did you end up getting picked up? How did you end up getting noticed? Like, kind of what all went into that? Did this kind of happen organically? Was it you reaching out to people and trying to figure out how to make it work, or what kind of happened there?
So I started out, kiting with my dad, and then in 2001, my father was a high school teacher, and So to pay for our new hobby, kiteboarding, he decided he was going to become a kiteboarding instructor and start a kiteboarding school in the summer when he was on summer vacation. So we went to Hatteras in 2001, and he got his certification with PASA.
Okay.
And he started a kite school on Lake Huron. So that's kind of what he did during the summer months. And when I was young, I would help teach with him a little bit. And then as I got older, I got more and more involved in teaching and in the business. But in the early days, we were working with Gastra Kiteboarding, which isn't really existent anymore in North America. But we were working with Gastra, and they were my first sponsor. I was 13 years old, and they gave me a 10-meter GXR. And it didn't matter if it was like 12 knots or 30 knots, I was riding the 10-meter GXR. And that was kind of in the days when like Martin Vari and Andre Phillip, they were winning the tour. And then when the new generation with Aaron Hadlow, Kevin, and Ruben were starting to come on tour in their early days before they're kind of winning the events. But I started to learn how to do kite loops back then. It was like, I remember all the videos. It was Bertrand Fleury unhooked doing these huge F-16s on Maui. And then, so kite loops were a big thing. But anyways, in 2004, my dad thought like, well, let's see how he does in events. I was getting pretty good, and I was better than most of the locals at our kite spots. So we went to Corpus Christi to the US Open for the Velocity Games. And I competed in the junior event. I think I was 13 at the time, and I won 16 and under. And that was kind of like, it was a big deal. And at the time, that was like my first time meeting any of the pros. And I'm like 13 years old, and I'm starstruck. There's like Andre Phillip and Martin Vari and like all these guys that I would watch all the kite movies before I go to high school or elementary school every day and read about them in the magazines. Like I was just in awe. So to do well at that event kind of like really kickstarted it for me to want to follow that career path. And of course, both my parents being teachers, they're like, no, like you're not going to be a pro kiteboarder. You got to go to university or something. So anyways, I kind of followed that path. And as I got older, I started to compete more. I started to go to the Gorge Games and all the kind of North American based events, the King of the Great Lakes back in the day. What did the Bronia brothers do up in Traverse City? The Fly to Maui, the Red Bull Fly to Maui event they did there. So I did kind of all the events that I could do. And then when I was 15, I won the Canadian Men's National, which was, I ended up getting a wild card spot by winning the Nationals into the Peak Area. So I did a few Peak Area events, but the problem was back then there wasn't a lot of, and it's still an issue now, is there isn't really any world tour events in North America. So it was super expensive to travel to all these stops. And at the time, in 2005, I switched to Nash from Gastra. And, Nash was amazing. They had the Torch then, and arguably the Torch was the best kite on the market for many, many years in the early days. And I was just getting gear, but I couldn't afford to go and travel. And also my parents are like, you're not dropping out of school. You got to finish your high school at least. So I did that. And then in 2000, when did I graduate? Jeez. 2008, or 2007 or 2008, I finished high school, and it was like, okay, Mom, Dad, I'm going to pursue this kiteboarding career. So I've been working at restaurants through high school, teaching kiting in the summers to save up money so I could, go and follow this dream I had. So I went to Taiba, Brazil, because all the videos I had seen were just like, that's the spot. So I went there with my best buddy Dave, and we spent 4 months there just kiting. And that was, I went from like, I had a decent level, but no way was I going to do well on the world tour or anything like that. But by the end, I had like a bunch of my double passes down, all that kind of stuff. And that was amazing. And I was only 17 or 18 at the time, so that was really cool. But that was a year too that there was, a bit of a change on the world tour, and people starting to ride boots more and whatnot. And they had the wild card video submission for the Triple S. And during that, stay in Brazil in 2008, 2009, I started riding boots more because my buddy Dave was riding boots. So we started riding boots a lot more. We built some kind of janky features, and we had a rail over a buggy, which was pretty cool back in the day. And anyways,
Yeah, were those old like NA blend days and
yeah, exactly. The really like old days of my career at least. But I put together a wildcard video for the Triple S, and I got in the 2009 Triple S, and that really is what kickstarted my career with kiteboarding.
okay.
I made, right before the event, I made the change to Best Kiteboarding, if anybody remembers Best Kiteboarding. I'm sure
I think they're still around there somewhere. It's just
once in a while,
kind of in the background just doing
yeah. But at the time, they were a big brand, and they were doing a ton with all sorts of different events. So I got on with Best Kiteboarding in 2009, and they supported me with travel and gear and all that kind of stuff. And I started competing, and I tried to do just everything because there's the world tour. I would do some stops here and there if I saw fit, but I tried to do a lot of different events as well. I would do a lot of the park events. I competed in the Red Bull King of the Air for 5 years. I did the Kite Tour Asia for a little while, for one season. Kind of competed wherever I could. And then, I was with Best for that. And then towards the end, when Best, they had some financial issues, I guess you could say, and whatnot, I ended up, it was kind of, I guess this would have been 2000 or 20, I was 27, so yeah, this would have been 2017. I switched to Airush. The distributor at the time, they were based in Vancouver, and I was living in Squamish for most of the year, so it made sense to switch to Airush. And at that time as well, I was 27. I was starting to kind of think about the future a little bit, and I was like, I need to start to think a little bit. Am I going to be a pro kiteboarder forever? Am I going to get more involved in the brand? And at the time, kind of with Best, I had started to work more with the development team. So I was working with the designers more and testing more and stuff. And so I went to Sri Lanka a few times to the factory, which was really cool. And they really took care of me with Best and got me more involved in the R&D process and whatnot. So I was kind of a lead tester with them for a long time. But then in 2017, I switched to Airush, and that's when I got more involved in sales. So I was the Canadian sales rep for Airush in 2017, and then I slowly worked my way up, grew my territory. I took over the West Coast and in Canada, and then we actually, Airush, we took over the distribution from the distributor. So we brought the distribution in-house at the start of COVID, 2019 it was. And at that time, I took over Airush and AK for the sales manager. So I now manage a group of sales reps around North America and South America. And so it's kind of funny growing up, getting into kiting, and then, those questions of what are you going to do after your career as an athlete? And, naturally, I kind of followed the path of getting more involved in the industry, and that's kind of where I am today. I mean, wind sports are kind of all I know, but I've grown a lot within that, working, doing R&D and then sales and stuff, and it's been kind of a cool career path. I didn't really know what I was going to do, but I knew out of high school, I was like, I'm going to kiteboard, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's awesome kind of see how you've evolved and changed with everything, and this kind of kept progressing forward, whether in riding and career-wise too. It's just kind of neat to see that this kind of fall into place for you and this work out so well. I mean, it doesn't work out for everybody that way, obviously, but I mean, it's super neat to just kind of see that progression from, you were one of those guys that I watched when I was first getting into the sport as like a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, like back in the King of the Air days, all that stuff. It was like super cool watching that, and all of a sudden, I ended up like meeting the King of the Great Lakes. I think probably back when I was like, 14, 15, that was those moments of like, these are all these people I always grew up watching. That's super cool. The same Star Trek moment you probably had at your event down in Texas, and then it's kind of kept my foot in the door at the shop here, kept rolling with everything, and it's kind of neat to see everybody kind of grow up in the industry together, almost at separate stages. But
For sure. And it's funny looking at it too, like throughout as you get older. I mean, I looked at, Sky Solback, or, Jaime Jerez, that like generation of riders, Andre Phillip, and you look at like where they are now, and, Sky is doing a lot of the designing of the surfboards and foil boards for Duotone, and Jaime Jerez does distribution and then his own shop in Tarifa, and Dre has Tona, and it's interesting to see kind of like there's some people that got completely out of kiteboarding, and then you see there's a lot of people that still stayed in the industry. And I do find kiteboarding, it's a small industry, but it's got a really good roots to it and a real family kind of atmosphere. I never really feel like it's too competitive against brands. Like obviously everybody wants to be the best brand out there and sell lots of gear, but at the end of the day, everybody's in this for the right reasons. People want to make good quality gear, and people want to get water time.
Yeah, exactly. No one's in this industry to really get rich, and everyone's here to kite more.
Yeah, if we wanted to get rich, we'd go sell pharmaceuticals or something.
Exactly. All right, so I guess from all the places you've been then, so you've been all over the place, what place sticks out to you the most, or like what place, if you had to like narrow it down to one spot you'd go a year no matter what, where would that end up being?
That's a tough one. I was very fortunate to get to go to a lot of places around the world for kiting, and there's a lot of cool spots, but somewhere that I always really enjoy going is Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, and it's not because it's conveniently close. That's definitely one these days that I enjoy, not having to get on a big long plane ride. But it's, I think, probably because the conditions there, you've got a lot of different aspects of riding there. Like when the ocean's firing and you can do a big like northeasterly downwinder in scary big, dredgy shore breaky waves, it's so much fun. And then riding in the slick and riding in the park there has its other benefits or aspects that I really enjoy. But then also the downwinders there on the sound side, riding through all the slicks and whatnot. So that I really enjoy Hatteras for riding. Obviously, you're on a sandbar in the middle of the ocean. There is not a lot to do there. There's not a ton of restaurants, that kind of stuff. So that's always challenging. But I do find it's nice because there's a ton of people that come down from the Great Lakes. Every time I'm down there, it's there's a ton of people from Canada, from Michigan, from upper states that are just looking to get kick off their season a little bit earlier. It's still maybe snow's melting up in New York, so they're like, okay, we're gonna go down and start our season a few weeks or a few months earlier in Hatteras. So I enjoy that aspect of it as well. But I think there's loads of good spots around. Europe's got a ton. One of my other favorites is where the Airush headquarters are based in Cape Town, South Africa. They've kind of got the same thing, loads of different spots within an hour's drive and tons of different conditions. And there you've also got a lot of stuff you can do off the water as far as hikes and lots of cool nature and animals in South Africa, and then loads of good restaurants. So another one of my top spots for sure.
Awesome. Oh, that's cool. And then I guess Squamish, how did you end up there of all places? I know it's one of the kite meccas of Canada. I don't know if it's that well known outside of Canada, I guess I'd say. Like, I never really knew about it until I started talking to you and seeing stuff getting posted from there from like you and Ryder and stuff. But it was one of those things that was never really on my radar of a kite spot or a kite destination you even visit.
Yeah, it's Squamish is a funny area. It's so we're based right in between Vancouver, so a big cosmopolitan city, and Whistler, which is the Disney World of the ski world, I guess you could say. So it's about 45 minutes to Vancouver if we go south, and it's about 30 minutes to Whistler if we go north. So it's well located for its geography. But I started coming out here in 2006 for the Canadian Nationals. It went from being on the East Coast of Canada to the West Coast. So I started coming out here for the Nationals and competing. And, the rest of the year I was traveling all over. And when I'd come back home to the Great Lakes, it was awesome. My family was there. I would teach kiting, but I wasn't getting enough time on the water. So I decided in, I think 2014, I was like, I'm going to spend the summer in Squamish. Like I'd come out here normally for a couple weeks throughout the summer. But then in 2014, I was like, I'm going to make the move to Squamish, and I'm just going to spend the whole summer there. And so I've still gone during the winter, but I spent the summer here, and I was like, man, Squamish is great. I rode every single day. Like it's crazy here. It's kind of the way the wind works is kind of similar to Hood River. It's a thermal effect. So up north of us, there's a big valley called Pemberton, and that area heats up. And then south of us, you've got Vancouver, which is on the Pacific Ocean, so it stays a little cooler. So it sucks the wind in between the mountains through the corridor. And Squamish, actually, in the First Nations language, means mother of wind, which, if they were calling it the mother of wind, it must have always been windy, right? And so
it has to have been.
Yeah, it has to have been. So it's always windy here in the summer, which is great. Like I said, the conditions, it's amazing flat water. You've got some good bump and jump stuff, but we don't get waves, which is a bit of a bummer. We don't have a ton of opportunities for downwinders and stuff like that, but it is always windy. So water time here, you can kite almost every day, May through till September. So that's why I came out here originally, is for the wind. But then I fell in love with everything else that was here. I was kind of traveling, and I was always thinking, like, where am I going to settle down? Eventually, can't just be a vagabond on the road forever. Where am I going to settle down? And, being a Canadian, I wanted to be in Canada. My family's here and whatnot. And this was the windiest place. And I started to get into other sports. I got into mountain biking, and later found out, Squamish is world-class mountain biking, and then snowboarding and all that kind of stuff. So it's got a lot to offer outside of the wind sports, but also it's just the community here. Everybody's quite athletic and, always down to session, which sometimes makes it hard for work. Everybody's texting like, hey, you want to go do this right now? And you're like, no, I got to work right now. Sorry. But, I think the sense of community here and the amount of water time I can get is why I ended up here.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, and so I love seeing the videos you post of yourself. You guys doing the backcountry snowboarding off of the snowmobiles. But mountain biking looks sweet out there. It does look like a really, really cool spot. It seems like Hood River in a way, but almost a little bit better on the other side of the off water sports. The skiing looks a little bit better, a little bit bigger.
Yeah, it's definitely it's funny, it's very comparable to Hood River as far as like geography goes and whatnot. And then you've got Mount Hood there, you've got Portland, so it's kind of set up very similar to Hood River. Hood River, I would definitely say, is a little more dialed for wind sports. You've got so many more locations, you've got really good wind swell, so Hood River is definitely set up a little bit more for that. As far as winter sports go, it's hard to compete with Squamish and the coastal mountains of British Columbia. We've got so many different zones we can go to and whatnot, so it's awesome for that. But it's nice too that we're only, for me, it's 6 hours to get to Hood River, so it's a quick and easy drive to go down there in the summer, and vice versa. Like a lot of the guys will come up here to ride, and nowadays most of the time they have their mountain bike with them, so they're mountain biking up here more than they're kiting. But very similar to Hood River, I would say, for sure.
No, that's awesome. Honestly, that wraps up everything I had to talk to you about today. Super, super awesome. Thanks for giving us kind of that whole background of how you grew up in the sport, how that whole transition worked. It's kind of super neat. I think it's cool to get an opportunity to get that background of the people actually running these brands now. So, running head of sales at Airush, it's just really cool to see how you grew up in the sport from kid to pro rider to now working in the industry to where you're at. It's just super neat to kind of get that background and that story of how everybody has gotten to where they're at in the industry and how it's changing and how things are going to continue to change.
Yeah, for sure. I think nowadays too, I look at it, and I mean, at my local spot, we don't have nearly enough young kids in the sport, and that's something. Hopefully, we can make the barrier to entry to the sport easier. Looking at what you guys do at MACkite, creating good packages that are affordable for people to get into the sport, but also being a resource for people for learning, stuff is so huge. And that's something that I look back on in my early days of kiting. There was one, it wasn't a DVD set, it was a VHS set that I had called Boost Kiteboarding. And it was, Shannon Best and a few guys on Maui who were coaching you through how to do a back roll toe side, a mob, etc. And I mean, nowadays I go on you guys' YouTube and I'm like, oh geez, they got it all on here. Like, learn to foil, learn to do this, and it's awesome to see, because it definitely it helps everybody progress, but also for young kids getting into it, it's such a resource for them. And that's one thing that I hope we can keep the momentum going in this sport, is getting young kids into wind sports, whether that be windsurfing, kiting, or now winging. Because that's really what drives our sport forward. And I mean, you look at the age now, the guys on the world tour, and the guys competing in King of the Air, like my generation from the years of King of the Air, Nick Jacobson, Kevin, Lewis, Aaron, a lot of us are no longer competing in the King of the Air. We're doing stuff behind the scenes or whatever it may be, and there's this whole new generation of young kids, and it's awesome to see.
Yeah, it is. No, I'd agree with you totally there. I feel like there definitely needs to be more young kids in the sport. I feel like it's a tough sport to get into if you're not either coming from a wealthy family or a family that is already in wind sports. I mean, it's definitely one of those weird things where there is definitely that hard barrier of entry there. I think we need to, as an industry, come up with a way to somehow make that easier for those kids that are looking to get into it. But then it is kind of wild to see all those young kids coming in to King of the Air. I mean, literally been the last 2 years maybe. Also, we've seen that influx of those 15-year-olds, and now they're 17, 18 coming in. It's kind of almost turning the whole competition side of that upside down, as far as that. It's just crazy how fast those kids actually progressed into where they're at.
100%. And that's, I mean, yeah, the barrier to entry is definitely tough, and I think in North America it's even more challenging. When you look at the geography of our continent, we're pretty landlocked. It's like you've got the Great Lakes, loads of water, East Coast, West Coast, the Gulf, but there's a lot of our, countries, US and Canada, that are landlocked, and there's not a ton of water access. But that's where I do think like winging is really going to open up a lot of new locations for people to be able to do wind sports. And then also snow kiting is always this one thing that it's been around way longer than water kiting. And it's always just kicking along, still going, but I wouldn't say it's gone mainstream, but it's definitely steadily growing, I would say, still.
For sure, yeah. No, I do think we're going to see winging kind of fill in that gap to where you don't need that giant beach anymore to launch and rig a kite at. So it does open up a ton of those bodies of water that are more inland, harder to get, smaller. So I do think that's going to see where a lot of that's going to grow. So it'll be kind of neat to see how that changes in the next couple of years.
Yeah, for sure. The one thing I think that's constant in kiting and wind sports in general, I find that everything comes full circle. I mean, you look at the way the disciplines have gone within the sport, and it's like, I remember back in the day, Rush Randall was kite foiling. I mean, he had snowboard boots mounted to his board, and he had some old Carafino foil on there, but he was kite foiling, the Laird Hamilton days of foiling big waves kind of thing. And then now look, like, kite foiling is like huge. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens with kiteboarding next. I think we'll probably get back into the low powered handle passes in the next few years at some point. And then it'll be interesting to see where winging goes, because there's so many different disciplines in winging. I know, like, within our company, Free Wing, we're developing a whole race series for stuff because, loads of people are getting into the racing side of it, which will ultimately be the Olympic class for winging.
Yep.
Freestyle, which the GWA is doing, and then wave riding, which is, I grew up on a lake, and it's amazing what wing foiling can do on a lake. I'm like, geez, like it's shorter, quicker period waves. Wing foiling is the ticket for riding a wave on the lakes, I think.
It is. No, I agree. Yeah, it's super fun. You can connect so many more waves than you ever could have traditionally on anything else.
Yeah, no, it's that day we had at the Mac event this year was insane. It was like side or almost side off, I remember. I went out on a 6. There was like nothing on the shore, and then there was these like peelers coming in. It was like, I felt like I was at Kanawha. It was amazing. I mean, they're like waist high, perfect, go forever.
Yeah, there was a weird direction that day, right?
Yeah, it was really weird, but it was like kind of perfect for wing foiling. Nothing on shore, which was too shallow anyways on the sandbar, but then just out from there, it was like windy enough to pick up waves. So yeah, pretty excited to see where kiting and winging go in the next few years.
Yeah, that'll be neat. Well, no, thanks for hopping on today, Sam. I won't take up any more of your time, but we'll wrap this up and maybe circle back to another one of these in a month or two and just catch back up, see what's been going on.
Awesome. Thanks, Pat. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam. Catch you later.